In a world where spirituality is often celebrated as a path to enlightenment and peace, it may come as a surprise to discover that highly spiritual individuals can also be incredibly complex and, at times, dangerous. Drawing on the profound insights of renowned psychologist Carl Jung, this exploration delves into the darker side of spiritual awakening. While many seekers embrace the light, some may inadvertently tap into shadows that can manifest as manipulation, obsession, or a distorted sense of morality. Join us as we unpack the paradox of spiritual intensity, examining how these individuals navigate their inner landscapes and the impact they can have on those around them. Be prepared to rethink your perceptions of spirituality and understand why it's wise to tread carefully around those who dwell deeply in the realms of the soul. Carl Jung developed a complex theory about the power of spirituality, especially in relation to his concept of the collective unconscious. For Jung, spirituality is not just a quest for peace or a simple belief in the divine, but a deep connection with the archetypal forces that reside in the collective unconscious of humanity. The collective unconscious is a psychic structure shared by all human beings, composed of archetypes or universal patterns of behavior and thought that influence our daily lives in invisible yet powerful ways. When a person delves deeply into spirituality, they are not merely seeking inner peace. They are coming into direct contact with these archetypal forces. These archetypes, such as the wise person, the warrior, the creator, or the destroyer, are not just symbolic figures that emerge in dreams or mythologies, but real psychological energies that can profoundly influence people's lives. According to Jung, spiritual individuals, by opening themselves to these forces, can become channels through which the archetypes act in the world. This connection grants them a kind of power that transcends willpower or intellect. However, this power is a double-edged sword. While it can lead to wisdom and compassion, it can also become a source of destruction if not handled properly. Jung was particularly emphatic in pointing out that archetypes are not inherently positive or negative. For example, the archetype of the wise person can offer great enlightenment, but it can also generate arrogance or emotional disconnection if not integrated properly. Similarly, the warrior can be a source of inner strength, but can also manifest as violence or aggression if unchecked. This is the latent danger in highly spiritual people. Although they seem to be at peace, they are in constant contact with powerful and often unpredictable forces. When someone disturbs a deeply spiritual person, they are not only provoking an individual mind, but also these archetypal forces that operate through them. An emotional or spiritual imbalance can trigger a reaction of disproportionate magnitude precisely because archetypes are forces that are not governed by human logic, but by the collective psychic energy that resides deep within each person. In this way, a spiritual person can unconsciously become a vehicle for intense and sometimes destructive archetypal manifestations. Moreover, the process of individuation, a key concept in Jung's work, also plays a crucial role here. Jung describes individuation as the process by which a person integrates all parts of their psyche, including those that are dark or unconscious. Spiritual individuals are often deeply engaged in this process of individuation, as they seek to unify their conscious and unconscious selves into a harmonious whole. However, this journey toward integration is itself dangerous, as it involves confronting repressed or denied aspects of the psyche, which can unleash psychic forces that are not always easy to control. One of the most powerful and present archetypes in the collective unconscious is that of the warrior. This archetype represents strength, courage, determination, and the ability to face both external and internal challenges. For spiritual individuals, the warrior is not simply a symbol of physical battle, but a metaphor for the internal struggle that we all face in life. Those who have cultivated a deep spiritual life have been in a constant struggle to master their own shadows, weaknesses, fears, and repressed desires. The spiritual warrior has learned to use their psychic energy in a controlled and directed manner, but this energy does not disappear. It merely accumulates and channels. In many cases, these individuals have successfully integrated this archetype through years of meditation, reflection, and confrontation with their own internal demons. Therefore, what appears to be calm and serenity from the outside is, in reality, the result of an internal battle that has been won after much effort. This is the paradox of the spiritual warrior. They appear peaceful, but possess a fighting energy that can be unleashed if necessary. When someone underestimates a spiritually advanced person, believing that their outward calm is a sign of weakness, they run the risk of awakening the dormant energy of the warrior. This archetype does not disappear simply because a person has reached a level of inner peace. In fact, the warrior is always present, ready to be activated at the necessary moment. If a spiritual person is provoked or challenged improperly, they may be compelled to reactivate their connection with this archetype, which can result in an explosion of strength and determination that can be surprising and even devastating to those who underestimated them. It is important to understand that the spiritual warrior does not fight in the same way as a physical warrior. Instead of resorting to physical violence, they use their psychic energy, intuition, and deep understanding of archetypes to face challenges. However, this does not mean that their struggle is less intense or less dangerous. In fact, Jung emphasized that internal conflicts can be even more destructive than external ones, as they involve confronting the darkest and most powerful forces of the psyche. This is the danger of provoking someone who has cultivated their connection with the warrior archetype. Despite their appearance of serenity, these individuals have learned to fight in the most difficult battlefield of all, that of their own psyche. If they are forced to activate this energy again, they can react in ways that are not only unexpected, but also extremely powerful. The spiritual warrior is a force that should not be underestimated, and challenging someone who has integrated this archetype can be a grave mistake. Furthermore, their intuition and ability to read the energies around them mean that, in many cases, these individuals can foresee conflicts before they occur, allowing them to take preventive measures to protect themselves. Someone attempting to confront or destabilize a spiritual person may find themselves facing much more organized and powerful resistance than they expected. The spiritual warrior does not need to resort to brute force. They have the power to channel their psychic energy precisely and effectively, making them a formidable opponent in any type of conflict. Therefore, it is crucial not to underestimate the inner strength of a spiritual person. Although they may seem peaceful and tranquil, they have undergone processes of self-discovery and internal struggle that have greatly strengthened them. This strength, although hidden beneath a facade of serenity, can manifest overwhelming power if provoked. The spiritual warrior is a powerful archetype that, when awakened, can unleash forces that are difficult to control. In these situations, the person no longer acts from their own free will, but becomes a representative of that archetype in the world. This can lead to heroic or sacrificial behaviors, but it can also result in excessive destructiveness if the activated archetype is one that seeks conflict or revenge. When an archetype like the destroyer is activated in a spiritual person, Carl Jung postulated that the human psyche is divided into conscious and unconscious parts, and within the latter resides what he called the shadow. The shadow is the collection of all the repressed or denied aspects of oneself, dark desires, fears, insecurities, and tendencies that the conscious mind does not accept or that society rejects. Although on the surface, the shadow may appear to be an accumulation of a person's flaws or defects, Jung believed it is also a vital source of psychic energy and creativity. For those seeking a spiritual path, the shadow can be particularly dangerous, as the pursuit of enlightenment or transcendence often comes with a strong rejection of these dark aspects. A deeply spiritual person may become so focused on projecting light and peace that they end up unknowingly repressing crucial parts of their shadow. This creates an imbalance in the psyche, for the shadow does not disappear simply because it is ignored or denied. Instead, it remains active in the unconscious, accumulating power and waiting for an opportunity to emerge. Jung warns that the more the shadow is repressed, the stronger and more dangerous it becomes when it finally surfaces. In the context of spirituality, this can be especially problematic, as the individual may mistakenly believe they have overcome their dark desires or weaknesses only to be caught off guard when the shadow manifests during moments of tension or challenge. On the spiritual path, people often try to purify their character by seeking to eradicate everything they consider negative or undesirable. This aspiration, while noble, risks creating an internal division where the shadow is pushed further into the depths of the unconscious. However, the shadow never completely disappears. In its repressed form, it can appear through projections. The individual sees in others the aspects of themselves they cannot accept. This phenomenon is particularly common in power dynamics or spiritual hierarchies, where the master or leader may project their own shadow onto their disciples, believing that they are the ones possessing the flaws that are actually part of their own psyche. When the shadow emerges, it does so uncontrollably and can provoke a rupture in the individual's life. A person who has spent years or even decades trying to live according to spiritual ideals of peace, love, and serenity may experience a psychological collapse if their shadow, laden with resentments, repressed fears, and dark desires, suddenly breaks into their life. This is the danger of not integrating the shadow. The more it is ignored, the more destructive it becomes when it is finally released. Moreover, the shadow not only affects the individual in their internal life, but also in how they relate to the external world. When a spiritual person experiences a crisis, their shadow can be projected onto those close to them, turning friends, followers, or family members into scapegoats for their own internal conflicts. This can result in ruptures in relationships, as well as a sense of betrayal and disillusionment among those who once saw that person as a model of virtue. Jung warns that this phenomenon is especially dangerous in spiritual contexts where followers tend to idealize their leaders and may not recognize the warning signs until it is too late. The process of individuation, according to Jung, is the path to integrating the shadow. Rather than denying or repressing the dark aspects of the psyche, one must confront and accept them as necessary parts of the self. This does not mean yielding to destructive impulses, but rather recognizing that the shadow contains a vital energy that, if properly channeled, can enrich spiritual life. Those who fail to integrate their shadow risk having this accumulated energy emerge in chaotic and destructive ways. Therefore, challenging or provoking a deeply spiritual person, especially if they have repressed their shadow, can trigger an unpredictable and potentially dangerous reaction. The shadow, when not integrated, can manifest as anger, emotional violence, or even self-destructive behaviors. Jung maintained that the more we deny our internal darkness, the more likely it is to take control of us at the most unexpected moments. Thus, while these individuals may appear calm and serene, their internal battles continue, and the imbalance caused by the shadow can turn them into dangerous forces if disturbed. One of the most fascinating and profound concepts in Carl Jung's work is his theory about archetypes, those universal and primordial patterns that inhabit the collective unconscious of humanity. According to Jung, archetypes are forces that transcend individual experience and manifest through myths, symbols, and behaviors common to all humanity. These archetypes are not merely static figures, they are dynamic forces that influence human behavior and sometimes control it. For a deeply spiritual person, the connection with these archetypes is even more direct and intense, which can be both a gift and a risk. Archetypes are not passive entities. They can be activated or awakened by various experiences, such as spiritual rituals, emotional traumas, or even seemingly mundane events. When an archetype is awakened, its influence on the human psyche can be overwhelming. The person no longer acts from their conscious ego, but becomes a channel for archetypal energies. This can be especially dangerous when the activated archetype is one related to destruction or chaos, such as the archetype of the wrathful god or the destroyer. In these cases, the spiritual person may become unpredictable, as their actions will be driven by forces that transcend their conscious control. The danger of awakening these dormant forces is that once activated, they cannot be easily turned off. In many cases, spiritual individuals who have worked intensively with archetypes have developed techniques and rituals to manage these energies. However, if provoked or disturbed in moments of vulnerability, these forces can be released uncontrollably. Jung warned that archetypes are powerful precisely because they operate at a deeper level than ordinary consciousness. They do not follow the same rules that govern conscious behavior. They are connected with the primordial forces of the psyche and can be both creative and destructive. A classic example of archetypal influence is the process of identification with the archetype, where a person identifies so deeply with an archetype that they lose their sense of individual self. This is common in highly spiritual individuals who, in seeking a deeper connection with the divine, end up merging with archetypes such as the savior, the martyr, or the warrior. In these situations, the person no longer acts from their own free will but becomes a representative of that archetype in the world. This can lead to heroic or sacrificial behaviors, but it can also result in excessive destructiveness if the activated archetype is one that seeks conflict or revenge. When an archetype like the destroyer is activated in a spiritual person, it can trigger a series of chaotic events both in their personal life and in their surroundings. Archetypes are impersonal energies and therefore have no particular interest in protecting the individual who channels them. A deeply spiritual person may be in contact with these forces without realizing that by being emotionally or psychologically disturbed, they are inviting a destructive archetype to take control. In the case of a spiritual leader or someone in a position of power, the risk is even greater, as their followers can be swept away by these archetypal forces without being aware of what is happening. Jung also noted that certain moments in a person's life, such as falling in love, the death of a loved one, or an existential crisis, are particularly prone to awakening powerful archetypes. In the context of spirituality, these critical moments can be seen as opportunities for transformation, but they are also times when the individual is particularly vulnerable. If someone external to the spiritual person provokes a crisis during one of these moments, the consequences can be unpredictable. Archetypal energies are not easily tamed, and once awakened, they follow their own course, often sweeping everything in their path. Carl Jung explained the concept of projection as a psychological process by which people unconsciously transfer repressed aspects of their psyche onto others. This projection is more common than it seems and manifests in everyday life when we attribute our own insecurities, repressed desires, defects, or qualities we do not want to recognize as ours to others. This phenomenon, according to Jung, is inevitable to some extent, but in the context of spiritual relationships, projection can take on a particularly dangerous character. When followers project parts of themselves onto spiritual figures, leaders, gurus, or teachers, the dynamic created is intense and potentially destructive. In spiritual relationships, the disciple or follower often sees in the spiritual teacher not just a flesh and blood person, but an ideal, an almost divine figure. This is where projection comes into play. Followers project onto their spiritual leader their deepest desires for perfection, wisdom, and holiness, but also their fears, shadows, and internal conflicts. The spiritual leader becomes a mirror of the hopes and frustrations of others, placing them in a position of enormous power, but also of vulnerability. When this projection is not managed carefully, it can lead to massive disillusionment, personal crises, or in extreme cases, the destruction of the relationship between the teacher and the follower. For the person occupying the role of spiritual leader, this type of projection can be both a blessing and a curse. On one hand, receiving positive projections can strengthen the leader's confidence and sense of purpose. However, as Jung pointed out, it can also inflate the ego, making the leader feel invulnerable or infallible. The danger arises when the spiritual leader begins to identify with these projections, believing they are truly the embodiment of the ideals that their followers see in them. In this case, the person distances themselves from their own humanity and begins to act from a position of absolute power, which can lead to destructive behaviors. Moreover, negative projection also plays an important role. Not all aspects we project onto others are positive. Often, followers project their fears, traumas, or internal conflicts onto the spiritual leader, seeing them not only as a savior, but also as the culprit for their own failures. If something goes wrong in the follower's life, they may blame the leader for not being wise enough or for not offering the expected solutions. This relationship is inherently unbalanced because the spiritual leader becomes overloaded with the problems of others, many of which have nothing to do with them, but are the result of unconscious projections. To better understand this phenomenon, Jung used the term transference, especially in the context of psychotherapy. Transference occurs when a patient projects unconscious aspects of themselves onto their therapist, which can generate an emotionally intense relationship. In the spiritual context, transference is even more complex because the relationship between the teacher and the disciple is not limited to a formal therapeutic setting. It often involves total emotional and psychic surrender. Followers seek guidance and redemption in the leader, hoping that they will provide answers to life's deepest mysteries. This dynamic can be profoundly transformative if managed well, but it can also be destructive if expectations and human realities are not balanced. The spiritual leader, for their part, may be in danger of succumbing to the projections of their followers if they do not have a solid connection with their own shadow. The shadow, as discussed earlier, is the part of the psyche that contains the repressed and unintegrated aspects of the individual. If a spiritual leader has not made peace with their own shadow, they run the risk of projecting their own defects or desires onto their followers, which can result in toxic dynamics of power and control. This is commonly seen in cases where spiritual leaders abuse their power, taking advantage of their followers emotionally or even physically, justifying their actions through distorted spirituality. An example of this is when a spiritual leader faces criticism or rebellion from a follower. Instead of viewing the situation as an opportunity for introspection, the leader may project their own insecurity or fear onto the follower, accusing them of being the cause of the conflict. This type of reverse projection can lead to a spiral of abuse and control, where the initially vulnerable follower seeking guidance becomes the target of the leader's own shadows. One of the deepest and most transformative concepts that Carl Jung introduced in psychology is that of the collective unconscious. Unlike the personal unconscious, which contains the repressed thoughts, emotions, and memories of an individual, the collective unconscious is a deeper level of the psyche that all human beings share. It is the repository of all of humanity's experiences and knowledge, expressed through archetypes and universal symbols that manifest in myths, dreams, and collective behaviors. The collective unconscious has a powerful influence on a person's decisions, especially for those who have reached a deep level of spirituality. Spiritual individuals are in more direct contact with this deep level of the psyche, which means their decisions are influenced not only by their own desires or conscious thoughts, but also by archetypal forces that operate beyond their conscious control. These forces can manifest as intuitions, dreams, or impulses that guide the person towards certain paths or choices. Jung suggested that individuals who are more in tune with their collective unconscious may be able to make decisions more connected to what he called the self, the deepest core of the psyche that represents the totality of the individual, both conscious and unconscious. However, he also warned that this connection to the collective unconscious can be dangerous if not handled properly. Spiritual individuals who identify too much with these archetypal forces may lose a sense of their own individual self, acting based on impulses they do not fully understand. In practice, this means that a spiritual person may feel called to make certain decisions or follow certain paths without fully understanding why. This can be both a blessing and a curse. On one hand, the connection to the collective unconscious can provide powerful intuitive guidance, helping the person make decisions aligned with their deeper purpose. On the other hand, this same connection can lead to irrational or destructive decisions if the archetypal forces operating in the unconscious are not well understood or integrated. A common example of this is when a spiritual person feels they must make decisions based on signs or synchronicities, another key concept in Jung's work. Synchronicities are significant incidents that seem to have a deeper purpose, and for those attuned to the collective unconscious, these coincidences can be seen as divine or spiritual guides. However, Jung warned that not all synchronicities are benign, and the collective unconscious contains both positive and destructive forces. Individuals who make decisions based on these coincidences without an adequate understanding of what they are facing may be swept away by archetypal energies that they cannot control. This is where the archetype of the hero comes into play. Many deeply spiritual people feel a calling towards sacrifice or service, which can lead them to act from the archetype of the hero. This archetype represents the journey of an individual who faces challenges, trials, and sacrifices in search of a higher truth or greater purpose. Although the hero's journey can be transformative and noble, it is also fraught with dangers. Jung warned that those who identify too strongly with this archetype may fall into what he called psychic inflation, a state in which the ego expands due to its identification with larger-than-life archetypal forces. When a spiritual person sees themselves as a hero or savior destined to change the world, they risk losing touch with their own humanity and the limitations of their conscious psyche. This can lead to grandiose but unfounded decisions that affect not only the individual, but also those around them. The danger lies in the individual not realizing they are being controlled by the hero archetype rather than acting from a place of balance and self-awareness. In the context of spiritual decisions, it is also important to consider the role of the archetype of the sage. Deeply spiritual individuals often identify with this archetype, which represents the pursuit of truth, knowledge, and deep understanding of life. However, like the hero, the sage can also be a dangerous archetype if mishandled. When a spiritual person identifies too much with the sage, they may fall into the trap of cold, disconnected intellect, making decisions that, although seemingly logical and well-founded, lack empathy or compassion. The process of individuation, one of the key concepts in Carl Jung's psychology, refers to the integration of all parts of the human psyche: the ego, the shadow, the archetypes, and the collective unconscious, so that an individual can become a complete, authentic person in balance with themselves. This process is particularly relevant on the spiritual path, as many spiritual individuals are in constant search of inner truth, wisdom, and connection with something greater than themselves. For Jung, spirituality was not merely a refuge of peace and calm, but a pathway toward the integration of internal psychic forces that can be both constructive and destructive. To understand the importance of individuation in the context of spirituality, it is essential to grasp that, according to Jung, spiritual individuals are in a continuous process of self-transformation. Spirituality is not solely about achieving elevated states of consciousness or enlightenment. It involves confronting the darker and repressed parts of the self, which includes working with the shadow, complexes, and archetypes. This process is not linear or simple. The integration of the shadow is particularly difficult for spiritual individuals, as most tend to focus on light, compassion, and purity, sidelining negative emotions or repressed impulses. On the spiritual path, the process of individuation becomes a struggle to balance light and darkness. Spiritual individuals are driven to find a sense of unity within themselves, but to do so, they must integrate the repressed and forgotten parts of their psyche. According to Jung, this process requires the recognition that both the positive and negative aspects of personality are essential. Those who seek only the light, avoiding or denying their shadows, risk being consumed by those repressed aspects in moments of crisis. Individuation, therefore, is a profound spiritual process in which the individual confronts their fears, insecurities, and repressed desires. This confrontation with the shadow can be a transformative experience, but also potentially dangerous, as the repressed forces of the psyche can emerge with great intensity if not properly managed. In many cases, spiritual individuals who have not fully integrated their shadow may experience emotional collapses or spiritual crises when these repressed forces finally come to light. In this sense, individuals on a path of individuation often find themselves in a constant state of psychic tension. They are trying to integrate not only the visible parts of their being, but also those that have been relegated to the unconscious. This tension can make them unpredictable, as the process of individuation is not a calm and linear experience. It is an internal battle that involves both spiritual growth and confrontations with dark and repressed aspects. Thus, it is crucial not to underestimate someone undergoing a deep individuation process, as they may be in the midst of an internal conflict between the archetypal forces of light and darkness. Moreover, the process of individuation is deeply connected to the quest for the self, the core of the psyche that represents the totality of being. The self, according to Jung, is not simply the conscious ego, but a much larger entity that encompasses both the conscious and the unconscious. It is the psychic center that unifies all aspects of the person. In the context of spirituality, many individuals seek the realization of the self through spiritual practices such as meditation, prayer, or contemplation. However, this journey toward the self also involves confronting the darker parts of the unconscious. During this process, the spiritual person faces not only the individual aspects of their psyche, but also the collective forces of the unconscious. As one advances along the path of individuation, it is common for people to experience powerful dreams, visions, or intuitions that seem to come from something greater than themselves. These experiences are not merely personal. They are connected to the collective unconscious, the vast reservoir of archetypes and symbols shared by all humanity. People who are deeply immersed in their spiritual path often report mystical or numinous experiences that seem to guide them toward the integration of the self. Nevertheless, these mystical experiences can also be dangerous if not handled appropriately. The process of individuation involves navigating between the waters of the conscious and the unconscious, and those who are not prepared to face the archetypal forces that emerge during this process may feel overwhelmed or lose control of their psyche. Jung warned that contact with the luminous, while it can be a deeply spiritual experience, is also one that can bring with it a significant emotional and psychic burden. If not managed wisely, the individual risks succumbing to archetypal energies, losing their sense of conscious self in the process. An essential aspect of the process of individuation is the acceptance of duality in spiritual life. True spirituality, according to Jung, is not about denying darkness in favor of light, but about finding a balance between both extremes, the integration of the shadow, the recognition of destructive archetypes, and the acceptance that the human psyche contains both light and darkness are crucial steps on the path toward individuation. Those who achieve this balance find a profound inner peace, but also become aware of the power and responsibility that come with being in touch with the forces of the collective unconscious. Therefore, the process of individuation for a spiritual person is not merely a quest for enlightenment or inner peace. It is a challenging and often dangerous path that involves confronting the darkest and most powerful forces of the human psyche. Challenging someone who is in the midst of this process can be risky, as these individuals are in a constant struggle to integrate their conscious and unconscious parts. Their connection with the archetypal and the luminous makes them individuals of great power, but also of great vulnerability. If they become emotionally or spiritually destabilized, it can have serious consequences. Carl Jung described synchronicity as a meaningful coincidence that seems to be guided by a purpose, even though it cannot be explained by traditional laws of cause and effect. In simpler terms, synchronicity is a phenomenon in which seemingly disconnected events occur simultaneously, but their coincidence holds deep significance for the person experiencing them. Jung saw it as a manifestation of the hidden connections between the individual unconscious, the collective unconscious, and the external world, where certain events align at crucial moments in life to communicate something essential, something that goes beyond ordinary logic. For spiritual individuals, synchronicity is a common experience because they are more attuned to their collective unconscious, which allows them to detect and make sense of these significant coincidences more frequently in their daily lives. These individuals see synchronicities not just as curiosities or surprising coincidences, but as important signs that guide their decisions and spiritual paths. Synchronicities can manifest as dreams, unexpected encounters, recurring symbols, or events that seem to coincide with a pivotal moment in life. For example, Jung recounted the famous story of a very rational patient who, during a therapy session, described a dream in which a golden scarab appeared. As she spoke about her dream, a real golden scarab knocked on the window of his office, surprising both the patient and Jung. This event shattered the woman's rational barriers, helping her open up to the depths of her unconscious, allowing for significant progress in her therapeutic process. For Jung, this was a clear example of synchronicity. The scarab was not merely a coincidence, it was a symbol that held profound meaning in the context of the patient's life and therapy. In the spiritual context, synchronicity acts as a force that connects the individual with the divine or with the archetypes present in the collective unconscious. When a person experiences a synchronicity, they feel that the universe is communicating directly with them, providing signals that guide their path. Decisions made based on these coincidences are not seen as mere choices, but as acts deeply guided by the flow of life and the connection between the individual and universal forces. Nevertheless, Jung also warned that synchronicities are not necessarily positive or benign. The meaning that emerges from a synchronicity can be deeply unsettling or challenging, as the archetypal forces that generate them are not inherently good or bad. They are simply powerful. For a deeply spiritual person, experiencing synchronicities can lead to moments of great clarity or, conversely, to an existential crisis. The danger lies in becoming overly reliant on synchronicities without adequate interpretation or balance between the inner and outer worlds. The problem is that spiritual individuals, in their quest for meaning, may over-interpret. Jung warned about the danger of what he called psychic inflation, where the ego inflates by believing it is being exclusively guided by divine or cosmic forces. A person who frequently experiences synchronicities might feel destined to fulfill a special role, or think their decisions are backed by the universe, which could lead them to act impulsively or destructively. An extreme case of this phenomenon is when someone interprets every small event in their life as a sign, thereby losing touch with objective reality. Jung emphasized the importance of maintaining balance between the internal and external worlds. Synchronicities are powerful and meaningful, but they should not be taken as a guarantee of success or as an excuse to ignore personal responsibility. A spiritual individual who finds themselves constantly guided by synchronicities risks losing their own critical judgment, which can lead to dangerous or reckless decision-making. Furthermore, synchronicities often occur during moments of psychic transformation or spiritual crisis, when the psyche is in a state of deep transition and change. These moments are both opportunities for growth and potential points of collapse, if not handled adequately. Jung observed that synchronicities often accompany significant events in a person's life, such as a career change, the death of a loved one, a new relationship, or the start of a new spiritual phase. These synchronized events suggest that there is an underlying order in the apparent chaos of life, an idea that can be reassuring for some and terrifying for others. Synchronicities also have a direct relationship with the process of individuation. Jung saw individuation as the process by which a person becomes what they truly are, integrating both the conscious and the unconscious and balancing internal forces with the external world. Synchronicities often occur when a person is on the path toward the integration of their psyche, marking important milestones in that process. These significant coincidences help the person better understand their purpose in life and their connection to the collective unconscious. However, they can also challenge previous beliefs and assumptions, forcing the individual to evaluate their life and decisions from a new perspective. The confrontation with the self is one of the deepest and most transformative aspects of spiritual life. For Carl Jung, the self represents the totality of the psyche, encompassing both the conscious and the unconscious, and it is the center of individuation, the process by which a person integrates all aspects of their being. However, this process is neither simple nor peaceful. It involves intense internal confrontation that, in many cases, can feel like a genuine battle. The struggle to reach the self involves integrating not only the conscious and desired parts of oneself, but also the repressed or denied parts, such as the shadow. This process of integration is profoundly transformative, as it leads the individual to confront aspects of themselves that they often prefer to ignore. For a deeply spiritual individual, the journey of self-confrontation often resembles a battle between light and darkness, where lofty spiritual ideals confront the most primal and suppressed impulses. The shadow, an integral part of the personal unconscious, harbors all those facets of the self that consciousness has shunned or buried. This includes desires, fears, traumas, and aspects of one's personality that clash with their self-image. Within the realm of spirituality, the shadow can pose significant dangers, as those pursuing enlightenment or perfection often overlook or suppress these darker elements in favor of projecting an image of purity and compassion.